Hi guys, Olive here. Today I'm here to do yet another discussion video. This was kind of an impromptu decision to make a discussion video about this. I was on my lunch break recently at work, and I came across an article on Twitter that I decided to read. If you're anything like me, you follow a bunch of different types of bookish websites and bookish people on Twitter, and so my feed is constantly filled with bookish content. There was one article that caught my eye that was published by the website The Millions. You might follow them. You should if you don't. They're really great. But I found myself as I was reading this article while standing in line waiting for my lunch, agreeing and disagreeing with what the author had to say. So I wanted to discuss my reaction to this article here in this video. The article was called Against Readability. It was written by a man named Ben Roth and was posted on the Millions website on February 21st, 2017. This whole article was about the term readability, specifically when you're talking about blurbs or pub sheets from publishers talking about a book's attributes. The article starts off by talking about the 2015 Super Bowl advertisements that Budweiser made. These advertisements were very much machoing up the idea of the macro brew, trying to set themselves apart from the micro brew or craft brew beer market. If you are a foodie or a beer appreciator like myself, you probably have noticed that the trend has been very much toward craft beers, beers brewed in small quantities, micro brews, more local brews, beers that are bringing different flavors, beers that are more representing one specific area. Of course, macro breweries are going to find this threatening, that people are more interested in drinking local. And so they started touting the drinkability of their beer, and it's a beer that's not to be fussed over. The reason why Roth is talking about the macro versus micro brew debate that's been brewing over the past few years is to make the analogy of a brew being drinkable to a book being readable. So the books that are readable are the macro reads, whereas the books that need to be savored and appreciated would be the micro reads. Think of a Moby Dick stout versus a light summer read that is watered down by the ocean water you read it next to. Although very serious literature can be carried in a beach tote as well. Am I right, Don Draper? I think this is a pretty apt comparison, honestly, and is meant to evoke the feeling of your palate. It's meant to compare books to something that can be tasted. A runaway summer hit goes down easy, might not be something that you would necessarily think about slowing down on and savoring, whereas a very complex book is something you want to take slow and really think about, which might be something you want to do with a craft beer. You might want to sip it to be able to pick up on the subtler notes. I want to start off this whole discussion by saying that I think he makes a decent point and that I do agree with some things he has to say, but I feel like there are some nuances that he's missing, some little bar snacks that we should nibble on. I know that's corny, but I fucking love this metaphor. I would like to introduce some of those nuances into this argument because I feel like they are things that are kind of glazed over and overlooked that really detract from the main point he's trying to make here. I think the biggest thing that I found when I read this for the first time is that there is a vein of snobbery that runs through this argument, the same way that it did with that article a couple years back about that woman saying, read what you want, but you should be ashamed if you're reading books written for children. That was essentially saying, if you are an adult who wants to read YA books, go ahead, but you should be embarrassed by it. That article very infamously talked shit on adults who wanted to read YA. And I found the same problems with that argument that I did with this argument. I feel like the main point of that article and then this article, and they both do make similar points, is that your reading should probably challenge you. While I agree that if you are a serious reader, you should at some point probably be reading things that challenge you, you start to get into some testy territory when you start making grand assumptions that reading is only for one thing. Reading is not just for self-improvement. I really feel as though if someone starts making the argument that reading is about one thing, that they are taking their own experience in their reading life and saying, well, reading for me is about self-improvement. So that's what reading is about. Not necessarily. I have said it over and over again on this channel that I believe that a person's reading life is extremely personal, and reading is going to mean something different to everybody. I'm not going to pretend that I'm immune to feeling some snobbery at some times, given that I consider myself a serious reader. There are some books that I don't consider serious reading, but I really try to not encourage those thoughts in myself. When anybody else wants to read and when they want to read and how much they want to read is their own business. I feel like sometimes here in the book community with our group of serious readers, we can sometimes turn our nose up at people who read exclusively on vacation or at the airport, beach reads and airport reads. When we're talking about people who tend to read specifically in those locations, we're talking about specific groups of people. When you're talking about beach reads, you're talking about people who are reading on vacation as a form of relaxation, probably trying to get some distance from their very stressful lives. When you're talking about someone who's reading on an airplane, you're talking about probably one of two things. Someone who's on their way to vacation, trying to escape their stressful life, or most likely you're talking about someone who's on an airplane for business, who's doing business traveling. So this is someone who's in the midst of stress. I don't know anyone who would pick up Ulysses on an airplane. In those cases, reading for those people represents what reading can be for a lot of us most of the time. Relaxation, escapism, trying just to have fun. These probably are not people who are in the book world like we are. They haven't heard of the great obscure titles. They see what's on the shelf at the airport bookstore. They need something to read. They want something to read. And so that's what they pick. And they probably don't want it to be intensely challenging because they're looking for something that they can just blow through. In those cases, a readable, easy to digest book is exactly what the doctor ordered. On a similar note, if we're talking about YA readers who are looking to make the transition to adult works, it is much more likely they are going to want to pick up something that is deemed as readable to ease them in to this new genre of fiction that they are introducing into their life. I don't know any young adult reader who wants Pension to be their first adult book. When I was in high school, I was a YA reader before it was even really considered much of a genre. And my first adult book was The Boy Next Door by Meg Cabot because I really liked The Princess Diaries. I went from that to The Lovely Bones and then moved on to things like The Handmaid's Tale. And now I read all kinds of different literature, the kinds of literature that I think these authors would find sufficiently challenging. But where would I be without that transition period? People also want this social part of reading big books, big hyped books that are considered to be very readable. I'm kind of excluded from this part of the discussion given that I don't really enjoy picking up hyped books, but there are plenty of people who want to pick up the book of the moment because it's fun to talk to your friends about a similar shared experience. Reading can be a very solitary, asocial activity because it's something you do by yourself. And while that might speak to the introverts among us, people who are extroverted might want to pick up a book so that they can join in on the conversation. And I see absolutely nothing wrong with that. Also in his article, it seems like Ben Roth is attributing the lack of reading more challenging, bigger books to this age of distraction. Articles online are getting shorter and shorter. Colleges aren't assigning big books anymore because their students won't pay attention to them. I can't say that I 100% buy that. I think websites have caught on that they need to get their message across very, very quickly, instead of going on and on about the same point because they have so much competition. But that is not exclusive to text form. Us YouTubers know that as well. Speaking of which, this video is probably too long already. But I think the argument of colleges not assigning big books anymore because their students just can't focus on it is a bunch of bullshit. Colleges can assign whatever they want to. If the student can't make it through it, they shouldn't be in that class. I think that is much more symptomatic of colleges bowing down to what students and parents want because they have turned more into businesses than anything else. But that is a different discussion. It is up to professors to assign big books. And I'd argue that the students aren't reading it not because they can't pay attention, but because it was assigned to them in the first place. And no one likes to read anything that's assigned to them, me included. So overall, while I like the point of we should be challenging ourselves as readers and that you're not going to get better unless you're challenging yourself with more difficult works, I think that's all well and good, but I don't think it serves anything at all to make an attack on the word readability. Especially when it comes to classic works, if something's not readable as a modern day person, then it loses its value entirely. Right now I'm listening to At Home, which is the history of domestic life by Bill Bryson, and he's referencing a lot of works that were extremely popular in their day, but are virtually unreadable to the modern person. What value does that have if it's not able to be understood? Even if a modern book comes out and it has beautiful prose, but it's such a slog to get through that no one in their right mind is going to dedicate their very valuable time to reading it, then what is its purpose? At the end of the day, if you want something to be read, then it does have to be readable. And that doesn't always mean it has to be the light beer equivalent of literature. Something can taste good and go down easy. You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, I do agree with Ben Roth's argument that if you're reading one specific type of book from one genre, if you're not picking up things with increasing levels of difficulty, then no, your reading life probably won't progress as fast as it could if you made those choices. But to vilify the very word readable and to pretend that the existence of a bestseller list is making people not want to challenge themselves is completely misguided. And let me let you in on a dirty little secret too. Even us serious readers still want popcorn now and again. So those were my thoughts on Ben Roth's article and on this topic in general. I would love to hear from you about what you think about this down in the comment section below, or you can reach me a variety of places on social media. The links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.